And of course these spaceships, like this one, the Spice Tug, are very, very different. And I remember now, I think it's because Alejandro had this clear vision and he used to brief us. So it's something I'd like to do. It was possible to draw the spaceship in its environment, in its setting, because the same for Giraud with the figures, Alejandro would tell you what they did or what they had to look like. And so it was a very creative thing. You know, it worked very well. There. How's that? Just put a couple of little figures in. So Alejandro was obsessed with making a team, a cohesive team. And so we were his samurai, you know, he saw it very much like that, the whole same idea as samurai. And of course in the film, so many of the warriors shared the theme of the samurai in the story. And he was very clear on that, you know, he always used to say, I am a warrior, I'm a strong warrior. And if you remember when he saw the end of when he saw the film that they actually made, he didn't want to see it. And his son said, oh, but you know, you are a samurai, you must come, you must see this, you must be strong. And he was so happy because it was such a bad film, and he's laughing, and that's almost the end of the film, of course. There. Shapes of the ships are very different from anything I've done before or since, because Alejandro had very well written out scripts, and we would open the scripts and he would go to a particular page and he'd say, from this page, boss, you must take this and you must draw it so that it gives this impression. So he was always very keen for the ships to be motivated, to be animalised, you know, so they gave the impression in some way of something. Right, when I was doing this painting, I can remember quite clearly, it's come back to me, we were all in the same room, a great big open plan office, and Jean Giraud had his table over in one side and I was in the middle, and Alejandro had his desk at the end, and Alejandro and Jean worked together rather more than he worked with me, because Jean Giraud was drawing all the persons and how they looked, and this was terribly important to Alejandro, so he was very beside Jean Giraud and saying, no, make him taller, make him smaller, whereas I think the spaceships, what was nice was he could just say, look, if they can look a bit like this, or they can, and we would discuss the atmosphere, and then he would just let me get on with it. But I was fascinated by the way Jean Giraud could produce all these figures so quickly, and all the characters in the book, because we had this great big script, you know, it's all that book, the script, and he was, you know, he'd have his script open at one page, I'd have mine open at another, and Alejandro would get quite worked up, and then Alejandro would act out the characters. He would say, oh, and she's like this, and he would do a funny step or something like that, and Jean Giraud would watch him go, ah yes, and then he would draw something. And of course Imogen, my daughter, has this lovely picture, which is a picture of the emperor, and Jean did a design for the emperor, and a bit weird, like a cockatoo holding something, and Jean and I thought it looked terrific, and Alejandro was a bit lukewarm, and Jean was so disgusted, he turned it into an emperor sitting on the toilet with a chain coming down, and he dedicated it to my daughter. But Jean was so original with his designs, because, you know, he was a bande dessinée artist, so I was absolutely fascinated by the way he could just, you know, in the time I'm taking to do this, he would have drawn a bit of a landscape, but he would have dotted in all the figures, and just a few little pencil movements, and you could see their eyes and everything. You know, I do tiny little figures like this, but he would have done a much bigger figure in the foreground, and you could just see from the body language what it was supposed to be all about. And I was so impressed by that. It's quite funny. It's just sort of taken me back on a Saturday. So it's Yeah, it's really quite 40 years ago probably, yeah, on a Saturday. And it was just so fascinating. There. There, little squidgy spaceship. There. 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 How's that? With the building. I found working for Jodorowsky quite compelling. It's unfortunately it was like almost the first film I'd ever worked on, so it was a shame I didn't realise how completely unique Alejandro was until of course I'd worked on other films. But he's possibly the only person I know, and that includes Kubrick, who had a very clear vision of what he wanted, and that was so refreshing, so relaxing. I mean, he always had a positive response, you know, no matter what you did, he would give you his reaction, and even if you wanted to change something, it was always a positive reaction. So that was very nice, and I think that's what brought out my creativity.
And how did you find working with the other artists? So could you name any of the other artists and say how you felt?
Well, there was Dan O'Bannon, who's not with us anymore. Dan, of course, was going to be the special effects man, and he, of course, went on to write Alien. So Dan was very American, and it was quite fun going out with him because obviously he was an American in Paris, and this was his first time in Europe, so it was a very American reaction to everything. And of course Mobius, Jean Giraud, you know, we worked in the same room all the time, and it even got to a point where in artwork we would share doing the artwork, so that Mobius would, for example, do the figures and then pass me the artwork and I'd put in the machine, and we just seemed to work really well, and we got on socially, and I can remember it being a very pleasant experience. So it's a great shame that he's not with us anymore.